All right, everybody, we are going to be going over photosynthesis for bioenergy. This guy is going to be probably one of the more lengthier topics we're going to go do. And I'm sorry to say that cellular respiration is going to be just as long, if not longer. In the past, you probably would have done photosynthesis as like a day assignment, maybe like 2 days. Be like, this is the chloroplast. This is where the light dependent reaction and independent reaction. We had to go into way more detail of what's happening in here. So, hope you have a sandwich or something like that. And I mean, we're going to get right into it. Okay. Lots of different things we have to go ahead and go over. Basically, the really big takeaway here is knowing the differences between the light dependent and independent reaction and basically the parts of the chloroplast, and then being able to understand, well, what's happening in each one of these processes. Before, light dependent reaction was like, here's where we absorb sunlight, the water breaks down into oxygen. And then in light independent reaction, we take carbon dioxide and we create glucose. Well, we're actually going to be going into way more detail of how that stuff happens. So this guy, I'm honestly going to be like allotting about 20, maybe 30 minutes of class to go over anything you're not really too sure about, because it's going to be basically a modeling assignment, some picture stuff, and then we'll be good to go. I want to make sure we actually do the lab associated with it. It's a pretty cool one where we're basically going to be measuring the rate of photosynthesis by watching these little leaf discs float on up, and then we can change up that we can change up parameters like changing the temperature of the water or the pH of the water or even changing the color of the light, and that's going to affect the rate of photosynthesis, hopefully. So we'll get around to that. Oh, all right, here we go. So in section 4, we should have had the conversation about ATP, right? We kind of briefly went over that. If you need to, go watch the College Sport video again and get a little bit more information about it, okay? Now, when it comes to the reaction of ATP synthesis, right? We start with adenosine diphosphate, ADP, and we also get a PI, a phosphate group, right? And when we get some energy into that, that's going to then create our ATP, adenosine triphosphate. The difference here is that, we can go take a look here. If we go take a look, here's our adenosine. Adenosine is this ribose and this adenine put together. And then we have one phosphate group, we have AMP. So this would be adenosine monophosphate. ADP is when you get two of them. This is adenosine diphosphate. And then finally, adenosine triphosphate is this one. And what's kind of cool is that if you can kind of understand here, right, we can see that we have the ADP is like that little orange beigey color, while the ATP typically looks like an energy like explosion kind of picture, right? Again, keep in mind the energy for this is locked in between these chemical bonds right here, right? So this is a very, very negative model, and you got another negative model. They don't want to be near each other, right? Two negatives, they want to repel. Well, what happens is that I am going to use some energy to hold these guys together, right? So I got to throw some energy in there to hold it together. Well, now I'm going to go ahead and lob one more in there, and it's even more energy. So ATP is going to have the most amount of energy. I don't think you're going to see like adenosine quad phosphate. I've never seen something like that, nor do I think that even exists. So we're going to be going and taking a look at this ATP. All right. Now the idea here. All right. Now the idea that we're going to go take a look at. Excuse me, is that we need to make this adenosine diphosphate and phosphate group together. We need some kind of energy, right? So in the case here, the energy that we can think of is going to be, whether that is sunlight, right, for photosynthesis. We can also do chemical potential energy in the case of cellular respiration. And there's a bunch of different other options in there, but we need an energy source. This energy gets absorbed by this adenine and phosphate, and that energy is what holds this specific section of the ATP together, and that's what we create the ATP. Then from there, this ATP is made. It's going to go ahead and bumble around until it goes to a cellular process. We're going to go ahead and get the phosphate group to shoot on off, right? The PI group will shoot off. And then from there, we're going to basically reset to create another ATP molecule, right? Now, what can we use this ATP for? Think back to like the pictures, right? We can use it for active transport, cellular movement, any anabolic reactions, or muscular movement, right? When we're doing muscle contractions. And it's a hydrolysis reaction because we are breaking down the molecule, right? ATP and water will then get us ADP, phosphate, and then the free energy. That free energy is this energy that we're talking about that will drive these reactions. All right. If you have a good idea about how ATP works, you're going to be okie dokie for, like what the goal is, right? Now, another thing that we need to be familiar with is this oxidation and reduction reactions. And oh my gosh, is this like the hardest thing? One of the hardest things to wrap your head around. Okay, even I like bumble around with this sometimes and do it. You'll have like what's called a reducing compound and then an oxidizing compound, right? And then what happens is that the reduced compound becomes oxidized while the oxidized becomes reduced. And you're like thinking to yourself, what? Like, what did he just say? Okay, this is what I'm going to give you a heads up on, all right? This gets people a little confused, and really, we just need to use this to explain like what happens with these high energy electron carrier molecules. All right, we're making like this like NADH and stuff like that. All right, we're going to go backwards to this. Okay, now a reducing compound, I want you to go take a look, right? We have these electrons that are right here, okay? These electrons are negatively charged, right? It's a negative charge to them, correct? It's a negative charge. Okay, cool. So what happens is that this negative charge goes onto some other molecule, and because I'm getting a negative, I am becoming reduced. So that's why this oxidized compound, right, the oxidizing agent, is becoming reduced because the electrons are transferring from molecule A to molecule B. It is being reduced. Because that this guy has now been reduced, he is now oxidized. All right, he is now oxidized at this point. I don't want to get into the weeds of why. Just know that electrons moving to the new molecule, that is the reduced compound, right? The reducing agent is whoever had the electrons to begin with. The oxidizing agent is whoever's going to go in and take it. This, like, I literally kind of go like WTF with this. Like, why the heck do we need to go and know this? Uh, it's just very, very confusing and like the wording of it. Like, it just takes a little bit of time to kind of like know the nuances of it. I would recommend you draw that picture just so that way you can kind of keep track of it. All right. Now, why is this necessary for us to go ahead and know? So in the case here, we'll have this molecule right here that's going to go ahead and have oxidation occur, right? So it's going to be oxidized, meaning that it had electrons, and these electrons ended up going to this NADH. It was reduced. So now it has electrons, and it's also going to have this hydrogen associated with it, right? So this hydrogen ion, specifically this electron, and will combine with this NAD plus, and that's basically going to make our NADH. And this NADH is then going to go and be oxidized, right, to become NAD plus. But during that process, it will reduce another molecule. And then this is basically it's an energy transfer. Energy transfer is what's happening, right? So to think about it, right, like electrons will carry energy. All right, they carry energy, and this is what we're using instead of just using ATP all the time, right? So what's happening is that this electron that was right here is then passed to this NAD plus to become NADH, and then it's then passed to this molecule right there in order to go make this specific molecule. And then this is like where the energy is now. Um, if I go and take a look, right? So this is like the way that I have the H here, right? Ends up making its way to the H to over here, right? Well, the thing is that there is no process that has, a go directly to B. So I use this as like almost like a middleman, and this is why we have this. All right. Gang, we're not even talking about photosynthesis right now. We're just talking about all the nonsense. Oh, excuse me. Oh man. Sorry. Sorry. I tried like to cover the mic. Oh my gosh. I apologize. I'm sorry. I hope I didn't blow out the eardrums of anybody. Ugh. Okay. Anyway, what I'm trying to get at is that this reaction right here, this reduction oxidation thing, is going to be showing up both in photosynthesis and in cellular respiration. So we just kind of want to have an idea. We want to grasp, have a general idea of what's actually happening here. All right. Specifically, we're going to be making these guys, and they're going to go and drive the reactions. And these are the reactions for specifically NADH is for the mitochondria. This is going to be for what's called oxidation phosphorylation chemosynthesis specifically, while the NADPH is going to be used for photosynthesis. So I was kind of say like P for photosynthesis. I'll show you that in a bit. All right, probably the simplest thing. There are two major phases of photosynthesis, right? You have the light dependent and the light independent reaction. There is another name for this. They usually call it the light reaction, and they called it the dark reaction. A lot of people use the thing like, oh, the dark reaction happens in the dark and light happens in the light. And they're like, this kind of confuses people. So you ever hear light or dark reaction, it might show up. God, I really hope it doesn't. But we just call it the light dependent and independent. So not a trick question. Which of the two do you think uses sunlight? The light dependent or the light independent? If you said light dependent, you got it right. All right. It depends on light in order for it to occur. All right, so light dependent is one that uses the solar energy. The light independent is going to be the other stuff. Now, something that's kind of interesting about this, right? We have this picture. This is the chloroplast right here, right? If you weren't too sure, this is the chloroplast. And there's a lot of stuff that's going on right here, right? Your chloroplast is made up of a lot of these like green pancake looking things. You can kind of see them right here. There's like I always call them green pancakes. Green pancakes. Like green eggs and ham. All right, so you get these green pancakes. They're called thylakoids. Right, that's the actual specific name of it, a thylakoid. Thylakoid are thin membrane parts of the chloroplast where the light dependent reaction occurs. All right, so specifically the light dependent reaction occurs here. We can see the light reaction saying it right there, right? We can see the light photon right here hitting the thylakoid, specifically the thylakoid membrane, hitting this chlorophyll right here we may be familiar with, and that's where everything ends up happening, right? Looks good. All right, the other part of this, the carbon fixation reaction, this is the light independent reaction, or the LIR, right? This is where we end up using carbon dioxide and plus energy made from the light dependent reaction, and we can go ahead and make sugars. Now, remember that NADH? Well, here's NADPH. This is the photosynthesis version of it. So this molecule has been, what is it, reduced or oxidized? It's been reduced, right? So it was reduced, so it's carrying some electrons, and those electrons are going to basically power up this process right here, and then I'm going to go and refresh the NAD plus and H plus in order to go and make more of that stuff. Over here, we have that ATP, right? So the ATP ends up having the high energy. We're going to go ahead and release that energy right there, create the ADP and phosphates, and then we're going to go and send that back to light dependent reaction. But basically, the energies here are used in order to turn this carbon dioxide into the final sugars over there, right? So there's lots of stuff that's going on in here. A way that I kind of also help out with my students is that if we look at the equation right here, carbon dioxide, water, plus sun energy gives you glucose and oxygen. The light independent reactions basically relate back to these two guys right here, while your light dependent reaction, that's going to be the water and the oxygen. You do want to be familiar with what plugs into where. We can see here, here's the water and the oxygen, and we see the carbon dioxide and the sugars, right? So we should be able to see those things showing up in there. Okay. We're at slide 5. We're now going on to 6. All right. That's an overview. Okay. If we had to do the too long didn't read, photosynthesis is just the process of absorbing sun energy to make sugars. And that's basically the premise behind it. Okay, that's literally all what's happening right in here. There were prokaryotic organisms that evolved to basically do photosynthesis. There's scientific evidence that ends up claiming that this is why this happened. There was no oxygen in the atmosphere beforehand because we need oxygen in order to go and do more cellular respiration. So there's a little bit of weird like evolution and history of life on Earth. And I don't want to go too far in the weeds. A lot of people think like, what's the first thing that came first, like the plant or the animal? And it's actually kind of an interesting thought experiment. So we end up taking a thought, right? Plants and animals are both multicellular organisms, right? So they're multicellular. So plants and animals are both multicellular, right? So then I ask yourself, all right, well, which one had the mitochondria? It's a bit of a trick question because both of them have a mitochondria, right? Because it's found in all eukaryotic organisms. Okay, cool. Well, which one has a chloroplast? Only the plant does, right? So it ends up asking us, okay, cool. So what happened? What kind of came first, like the animal or the plant? Um, and it's kind of like weird about it is like it's almost like the animals actually came first, because of the having the mitochondria and no chloroplast, and then the plants were like soon after, right? But if you think about like the animals available, they may not have been able to be like super big and stuff. So it's very interesting, how this ended up happening. We can kind of talk a little bit more when it's relevant, but it's an interesting debate and discussion that's happening in the biology communities right now. Right. You can't really have a lot of big animals without there being a lot of oxygen being available. So it was like very small animals. Like we're talking about like, not a lot of cells, right? Again, like your first animals were sea sponges, right, and stuff in there. Okay. All right, so going back to the question at hand, right, with talking about photosynthesis and the origins of it, prokaryotes will have, and specifically cyanobacteria, they'll have the specific kind of components in order to go make a very basic chloroplast. They'll have the to be able to do the light dependent reaction and be able to do the light independent reaction. So basically, what we're thinking is like endosymbiotic theory. There was a early cyanobacteria. The animal cell ate it and said, I might just keep you around instead of trying to, destroy you because you can just make sugar for me. And then sure enough, now you have the sugar making factory. It's pretty kind of cool to think about, right? Okay, so the whole shtick behind what's actually happening in the light dependent reaction, right? Photons, which is light energy, is going to go and take these uh, uh, electrons to a higher excited state. And what this ends up doing is that it's going to allow um, for processes to go ahead and take place. And that's going to be like the pictures that we're going to be looking at. Okay, so we're going to be capturing sunlight. We're going to be using that energy to basically create like ATP and NADPH, which is then going to go and be used to make the sugar. So it's like light dependent reaction is like we can't just use sun energy to make sugar, right? I mean, that is what's happening in photosynthesis, but it's kind of like you can't just take light and turn it into sugar. What I need to do is take light into a workable energy and then use that workable energy to turn it into sugar. If that kind of makes sense. It's kind of like, a check is money, right? But like a check, I can't really go to a store and buy stuff with a check. Not normally, not really anymore. So instead, what you do, you take the check to a bank, and the bank will give you money, and then with that money, you go to the store and you can go buy yourself. It's kind of like the same concept right here, right? We're trying to we need it to be in a currency that can actually be used in order to go make these molecules. Okay, because I had to get like some tea because like my throat is getting really scratchy. Okay, there is a stuff called chlorophyll. A chloroplast and chlorophyll. Wait a second, they're not the same thing. They're not the same thing. Chlorophyll are the light-absorbing molecules that are located within which are located within our chloroplast, right? Specifically, the thylakoid membrane. All this is happening, at least for the light dependence, the thylakoid membrane is where all this stuff is taking place. So what happens is that the photon, right, here's the sun says shine, 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 boom, and then the photon ends up getting absorbed by these chlorophyll molecules, right? So what happens is that these proteins, right, these chlorophyll molecules are basically absorbing the light, transferring the energy, and we're going to go and get this electron to an excited state. And this electron is specifically coming from the water that we're using to water the plants. And what happens is that it's at an excited state. It goes to an electron acceptor, right? Wait a second. Hey, remember, like this is this is going to be reduced because it ends up getting that electron. So this is your oxidizing agent, right? That ends up becoming reduced because it gets it. So this is the reducing agent, right? Reducing agent. and it ends up becoming oxidized, right? That's what I was saying. Like the wording of it is so confused. Like, why do we need to know this? I'm like, I kind of agree. I'm like, kind of a little silly. All right, but now what happens is that the electron has the energy, is then will be able to drive the rest of these light dependent reactions. All right, so it's super necessary, super important for this to happen. All right, now light is absorbed in two spots, photosystems 1 and photosystems 2. Now, what's really dumb about this, all right, guess what? Which one do you think comes first? Photosystem 1 or photosystem 2? Which one do you think is the first one that ends up being absorbed first? If you said 1, you're actually incorrect. It goes photosystem 2, PS2 to PS1. Really dumb reasoning behind it. I mean, it's not dumb, but it says photosystem 1 was discovered first, and then upon further investigation, they found photosystem 2. So they called 1 1 because of the first one, and photosystem 2 because it was the second one. But photosystem 2 is the first step of this reaction. It's just so dumb. The scientists are silly. I don't know. It's cool though. I mean, I think the current joke is like, why do we call it 2 then 1s, like to mess with AP bias students. All right. Anyway, so let's go back to what's at hand, right? Photosystem 2 and photosystem 1, that's what this stuff is. Oop, that is like right here is basically like, these proteins with the chlorophyll that are going to take in the light energy. All right. Some energy is a little bit more efficient to use as others. We can see some proteins are embedded within our cell membrane. We can see that some of the protein is located on the outside, some of it's located on the inside. We should be able to determine, okay, cool. So we have, these proteins that are embedded in there, and they're designed specifically to be within the cell membrane. All right, this right here is a picture of showing you photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. It's a very, very, very oversimplified picture, and we're going to make sure you kind of understand it. But if you had to do the elevator pitch, right? Like, okay, I'm looking at the time. Like, describe to me photosystem 2. Water goes in, right? We water our plants, and what ends up happening is that the water breaks down into electrons, oxygen, and hydrogen ions. The hydrogen is going to go mess around for the electron transport. Sorry, it's going to go to the ATP synthase in a bit, and then the oxygen, we only have half of them. Once I get 2 oxygens, that will create the oxygen that I can breathe. That goes into my reaction, right? Half plus half is equal to 1, right? So uh, one O2 is one oxygen molecule, right? All right. So then the electron will end up hitting the light, right? Goes to a higher level. Then this electron, it's just going to go through a process of reducing and oxidizing reactions until it ends up going to photosystem 1, gets excited again, and then eventually will make its way to get to NADPH, which is going to be used to go drive the light independent reaction. All right. Do you need to know the names of all the proteins that are in here? Absolutely not. I don't even know the names of them. I just know that they are proteins. We can see that it ends up going from a higher energy to lower energy. Do I need to know photosystem 2 and photosystem 1? Yes, you need to know them both and make sure that you know what they do, right? What does it do? And then, the order as well. It might actually be a benefit for you to write down like a table off to the side. I'd almost maybe suggest to go do this like right now, right? Um, is to go and say like, okay, here's the part of photosynthesis and what is its role. And what you can just say, right, like PS2 is going to be used in order to, excite the electron, excite electron, and also split the water, right? We're going to go and split water right here. Then you go into the electron transport, which is just like oxidizing, reducing, right? Like this might help you out as a cheat sheet, so that way you can kind of know what is happening in each one. And if you want to, you can maybe even say like, okay, here's 1. I got my picture of 1 right here. Here's 2. Here's my picture of 2, 3, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? This might help you out being able to know all the order, the stuff that ends up happening here. So this is actually a kind of a further image back of what this ends up looking like. So let's go ahead and take a peek at this. So here's photosystem 2, right? Photosystem run. So the water has split into oxygen, hydrogen ions, and the electrons. Electron will go over to here, be used, be excited, be used, be excited, to eventually make its way to NADPH. where it's going to be acting as the oxidizing agent to eventually become being reduced. All these hydrogen ions, this is going to be showing up in here, right? H plus, right? Think about pH for a second, right? As hydrogen ions increase, we know the pH is going to become more and more acidic. So this is actually very, very acidic. This is the thylakoid inner space. So the stroma is the outside of it. So we're actually looking at the bottom of a, we're looking at the bottom of a, of a of a thylakoid right now. So what's happening is that we're going to go and pump all these hydrogen ions that are in here, and kind of like as you were, I always like equate this to like a balloon. If you start to blow a lot of air into a balloon, what do you start to build up? You start to build up pressure, right? And then with that pressure, we can then end up using this enzyme, ATP synthase, to lower the activation energy and catalyze the reaction of adenosine diphosphate into ATP. And during this time, we end up kicking this hydrogen ions out at the time as well. Well, where do these hydrogen ions end up going? Well, they actually attach to this NAD plus. I'm going to go ahead and just erase and redo, right? So this All right, there it goes. So all right, the mic died. The H plus is going to go ahead and go over to here, bind with this NADP plus to eventually make their NADPH. So everything's kind of like accounted for, right? So this water, right, this H2O that was here to begin with, the hydrogens of this water eventually make their way into this molecule over here. The oxygen is going to go and diffuse out. This is what you breathe like in your nose, right? This is the O2 that you breathe in order to go ahead and, smell and stay alive and stuff like that. And then the electrons from this water are also going to eventually be here in this NADPH. But we can't just turn water into this stuff right here. We have to go through a series of chemical reactions in order to go and make it to where we need it to go. All right. It's a whole thing ends up happening in here. Electrochemical gradient, similar to a concentration gradient, right? Here is that we are pumping this energy in here in order to go and have a lot of hydrogen ions to eventually pump them where they don't want to go in order to drive a chemical reaction. All right. This is just a little bit of a show of what this ends up looking like. So as the energy from the electron transport chain is being used, that's basically the electron that's flowing through it. We're pumping the hydrogen ions to where they don't want to go. And then from there, we're going to go and accumulate that pressure, right, that balloon, and we're going to go ahead and push it through ATP synthase to create our adenosine triphosphate molecules. This happens, and what we're doing is creating ATP and NADPH, and this is everything that's happening in the light-dependent reaction. All right, if you were not able to follow what happened in light-dependent reaction, you need to go and just write those things down, and we can go ahead and make sure that you're all squared away. Now we get to go do the light-independent reaction, and thankfully this is a little bit easier. The light-independent reaction is way simpler, and we're not going to go into nearly as much detail. Okay. I want you to go ahead and take a look at this, okay? So you tell me, we have ATP right here, and we have ATP right here, and we have NADPH right there. Where did the ATP and the NADPH come from? If you said the light dependent reaction, you are correct. All right, so this is where we ended up making the energy, right? We took sunlight, in the light dependent reaction, we made ATP and NADPH. What is this going to go do? These are going to go and provide energy. They're also going to allow us to reduce these molecules that are specifically happening here. Now, it's a three-step process that you need to know the three steps. Not in detail what happens, just know we have carbon fixation, in which that basically we just stick our carbons with each other in order to go make this big old molecule. Reduction, well, why does it get reduced? Oh, because the NADPH is reducing it, right? And then it reduces it, and then we're adding the electrons to it. And then finally, you have regeneration of RUBP in order to go ahead and just make this, this guy right here, this carbon molecule, where we're going to go lob all these carbon dioxides on there and eventually just alter it until we can create my sugars and other carbon compounds. So I'll make glucose out of this. This is how you can make cellulose and other really cool things in there. Right? It is a wild process. This is also called the Calvin cycle. So light independent reaction, Calvin cycle. We can see the picture right here of where we are taking place. Again, that ATP and NADPH is being used in order to drive this reaction. Gang, I don't know how long this video was. Please come with your questions. We'll be playing photosynthesis going forward, and then eventually we'll move our way into cellular respiration.